So this session is going to be on restorative investing, and we want you to take the opportunity to think a little differently, okay? Here in Asia, the banner of do good, do well, impact investing, and now ESG investing has been the main topic of discussion when we speak about alternative finance. Even mainstream investment banking now has asset classes for impact investing. But after all these years of impact investing, we still do not have true systems change. We have even greater social and deeper problems. In any case, the Monitor Group report actually, back in 2012, already pointed out that impact investors who'd look to do good and do well tend not to invest in poverty alleviation. More recently, the 2020 GIN annual report actually confirmed this, and it showed that more than 2/3 of impact investors actually look for either market returns or just a little bit less than market returns. And our own research report published in 2018 also shows that there's a clear mismatch of expectations between investors and community-based enterprises. So community-based enterprises, which are too big for microfinance and yet too small for impact investing, tend to fall in the missing middle and face a funding gap. The Monitor Group report in that report called for philanthropic dollars to fill this gap, and they called it venture philanthropy. Namaka Akbo calls it restorative investing, and more recently, even Bill Gates called it catalytic philanthropy. Ultimately, it is about shifting money that is not looking for market returns to really help marginalized communities to build back better. Someone I really look up to, whose name is Namaka Akbo, is the CEO of a $450 million fund called the Katali Fund. And I call her the mother of the term restorative economics. She reminds us that it is time to dream bigger and build an economy that heals and restores marginalized communities that are actually creating a more just and prosperous world for all of us. We need to know that restorative investing is not just about flowing money to women or marginalized communities, but also about how we invest. Restorative finance calls us to look a little deeper, to examine not just the implicit biases of who we invest into, but also the due diligence process, how we seek and look at risk, the terms in which we give funding to. Do we extract profits from entrepreneurs and the community instead of helping them rebuild their wealth? Even impact metrics that we talk about tend to be determined by the investor as opposed to the one in the community connections or with the lived experience. So they end up tending to add more work and burden the entrepreneur. Today's panel on restorative investing and the role of philanthropy is meant to highlight the need for a new form of financing. As I said earlier, money is medicine. When we try to restore wealth in the marginalized communities, really to help end poverty. We hope to elaborate on not just flowing funding to marginalized entrepreneurs, but also how and the type of funding they need. How philanthropic dollars can actually be used to enable non-extractive, entrepreneur-friendly, affordable, and really restorative investing. We have a very esteemed panel today with us who are pioneers and already walking the talk, leading the way for restorative investing. We have with us Jaime Gloshay, co-founder and co-director of Native Women Lead, Jasper van Brakel, CEO of RSF Social Finance, and Kate Cochran, CEO of Empire Ventures. I'd love to welcome everyone on stage now. Thank you so much for dialing in. I know it's kind of late in the evening from where you are. We are truly, truly honored to have you here with us. You all have very esteemed backgrounds, which I encourage everyone in the audience to go online and Google them and find out more about them on LinkedIn. So I thought it would actually be nicer to have you introduce yourself and your organization really quickly and how you fit into the space of restorative investing. And Jaime, as the Indigenous woman on our panel, I'd love to give you the first word. Jaime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everybody. My name is Jaime Gloshay. Jaime Gloshay in Asha, Nakaida Nanishlas, and Ajani in Ashache, Zafagai Bashishchin. That's my introduction in Navajo. I'm also a white man Apache in Kiowa. Raised and born here in the Southwest in the United States, also residing in Tiwa Territory, also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you again for the invitation. As Laina said, I'm a co-founder and co-director of Native Women Lead. We're an organization that supports Indigenous women entrepreneurs and leaders, pretty much grassroots since 2017, primarily volunteer-led, and started with a bunch of Indigenous women around a table, asking what makes us different, what makes us unique, how do we address the challenges and the problems that we see in our communities through entrepreneurship, and how do we help ourselves and one another as we continue to grow our businesses and grow our leadership path. So fast forward a couple of years later, and now we're an organization that's raising a $10 million fund and actually redesigning capital and looking at it from the lens of a matriarch, from an Indigenous woman's perspective, on how to deploy capital as well as work with entrepreneurs so they are fully supported in their entrepreneurial journey to realize their dreams and goals. So yeah, that's me, and really grateful to be able to do this work. And now I'll, I guess, send it over to Jasper. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jaime. I know there's so much more. I'm a big fan of your work ever since I first met you. And thank you for introducing yourself. Jasper, on to you.
Thank you, Laina. And Jaime, it's such an honor to share this stage with you. Laina, I want to say you're such a visionary and so inspiring, and thank you for this invitation to come and share a little bit of the things that I learned and my organization learned. So I'm Jasper from Brakel, originally from the Netherlands. Spent some time in Germany as well, in Switzerland, and in the United States since about 12 years, and calling in from Coast Miwok land in the Bay Area, San Francisco area in the United States tonight. Well, tonight my time, in the morning your time, I know. So my journey is really been evolving around social enterprises, and throughout my work life, I've been working in and supporting and helping finance social enterprises because I believe in business as a force for good. It doesn't always have to be destructive, and we saw such fantastic examples today in the few videos that I was able to witness, and I hope I'll be able to see more of them, because those are not only the stories, but really the examples that give me hope, because business can be a force for good, and that requires that we put money to work towards healing, as Namaka says. You know, it's about putting money to work so that it can work towards healing, towards good, rather than to extract from human beings, from the land, and from our planet. So my role in our organization, RSF Social Finance, it's really around doing just that, activating money. So we work with investors, we provide debt, loans to social entrepreneurs, we do some investing as well, and work with people around their philanthropic funds as well. We do that with a team of fantastic people, mostly based in the Bay Area. We have about 25 employees, but we work throughout the United States and Canada. So our geographical reach as an organization is really focused on the northern part of North America. We do a little bit in Mexico, but it's mostly United States and some of it in Canada. RSF has been around since the mid-1980s, and we have a loan fund, we have philanthropic funds, as well as several thematic funds that I'm happy to share about later in the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jasper. I love how you did the Laina acknowledgement in the beginning of what you say. When I'm in California, I always do that. It's in the land of the Ohlone people. I'm calling in from Singapore, and we have our indigenous people. I always say the land of the Malay people before we were colonized. Kate, over to you, to your introduction.
Hi, my name is Kate Cochran. I am the CEO of Upaya Social Ventures. We are a nonprofit organization that invests in companies in India, specifically with a goal to create jobs for the extreme poor. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we have a particular focus on empowering rural areas and also making sure that our active portfolio is evenly balanced between men and women founders, because we really believe in the power of women founders and women entrepreneurs in having strong impact in poverty alleviation.
Thank you very much. So let us jump right into conversation here. I talked in my opening a little bit more about the funding gap. So let's explore the funding gap. And I'd like to start with you, Jaime. Could you speak from your perspective, both as an Indigenous entrepreneur yourself, as well as one helping other Indigenous entrepreneurs? I believe you support about 5,000 Indigenous entrepreneurs. How do you see this funding gap, and how have you seen philanthropic dollars play a key role in shifting that?
So access to capital is a big issue in our communities. We definitely see where entrepreneurs don't have access to traditional financing institutions such as banks and community development institutions. Kind of interestingly enough, because of the tribes and the nations that are here in the United States, a lot of banks are nervous to do business in our communities because they can't get collateral in case somebody should default. So it's actually really systemically excluded Indigenous people in this country. We've also had a lot of issues around predatory lending. So a lot of people actually have financial trauma in our communities around getting loans at exorbitant amounts, as well as being able to, like I said, build secure other types of investment. Sorry, my dog is barking.
It's all right.
Our communities, just like any other entrepreneur in this country, they need financing to start a business and grow a business. We did research in our network, and entrepreneurs need at least $50,000 to start, and that's just to pay for equipment, a space, for staff, or products, services, etc. So they often are missed because they cannot access a traditional financial institution, and then the microfinance, which I actually used to work in, they don't fund enough dollars for them to be able to access that critical amount so they can actually start or grow.
Thank you very much. I'm sure your dog is enjoying the session as much as I am listening to you. Jasper, I remember very distinctly when I first heard you speak at Transformative Finance Conference, and you talked about how really we have commoditized people and planet, and that's a key problem that we have, and how this has to change. RSF, as you said in your opening, has really led the way on integrated finance, which includes grants from philanthropic sources. Can you give your take on why and how you see philanthropy playing a very key role in helping marginalized communities and ending poverty?
Thank you for that great question. I think there's a simple answer as well as a much longer, but I'll stick to the brief one for today. So I think we need to break through the assumption that there's money that's there to be invested and that needs to make market rate return, and then there's a whole different kind of money, and it's called philanthropy. What the way I look at it and the way we are trying to look at it at RSF is they are on a spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum, it's all about the financial return, and the impact is really only it's maybe a welcome side effect, but it's really not the intention. And all the way on the other side of the spectrum, you have philanthropy, where you have basically negative 100% return, right? From a financial perspective, but you really optimize and maximize for impact. And the way that we look at it at RSF is there's a lot of space in between just giving a dollar away 100% and looking for market rate returns. And so let me give you an example. Diaspora company, which is a spice company that works with mostly women in India, actually, that RSF was able to provide a loan to. And then we also were able to come in with a grant out of one of the collaborative philanthropic funds that RSF has, that we have raised money into, that together with the loan provide more of a package. So this integrated capital approach. And, you know, in the case of Diaspora, it's, I was shocked to read this statistic, so I want to share it with you. And you probably all know this, but only 2% of what the consumer pays for the spices actually goes to the growers.
Wow.
Yeah, 2%. Wow. And there is an average of 10 intermediaries in between. So this company, Jasper, is trying to break through that and to cut out the 10 middlemen, they're usually men, in this system. And so what RSF was able to do is through providing a loan, a grant, but also community support. So there's also an element of human capital and network capital and social capital that's part of this integrated capital approach that's necessary for the social entrepreneurs to be able to be successful. Is that philanthropy? Yes, in part, but it's also a loan. And you know, it could also be a small equity investment. We do that sometimes as well. So rather than approaching it with a one-size-fits-all, we're trying to approach it with what's really needed in this particular situation, and then to fine-tune the different elements of financial and non-financial capital.
Wow. Thank you. That example is so pertinent about 2% only flowing down. There's so much that's broke in terms of how the community itself can build their wealth back. Thank you for sharing such a concrete example, Jasper. I think we'll be able to come back to a lot more of the other structures that you have. Kate, you have been involved in impact investing for such a long time, yet even your fund, Upaya Ventures, turns to philanthropic dollars to fill the funding gap. What do you think is the key reason for this gap, and how do you see the role of philanthropic dollars in restorative investing?
So I think that sometimes when people think about impact investing, they have this idea of you have to do well and do good, and that there's one model. But I don't think of it that way. I've always thought of it as a continuum. And in recent years, I think that there has been more understanding that there is a lot of work to be done in the continuum between either pure investing on this side and pure philanthropy on this side. There's a need for both of these, but there's a lot of need in the middle for, maybe, I kind of don't like this word, but people use the word concessionary capital that isn't trying to reach a market return, but has, a clear impact vision that it wants to accomplish. I mean, I think that's what we do at Upaya. Very often people talk about the missing middle in terms of companies that are too big for microfinance, but they're too small for traditional finance and sometimes even for impact investing. Those are the companies that we invest in. But the reason it's missing is because, there need to be more investors and more creative structures that work for companies that don't look like Silicon Valley startups. They aren't going to be growing at, rocket ship levels. And that's okay. If they can grow at, a reasonable 10 or 15% a year, and they get profitable and they can repay their investors with some return that isn't an outlandish return, that provides a recyclable form of capital that can do a lot of good in the world. I am, deeply grateful to philanthropists who make grants, but anybody who's ever worked in a nonprofit organization knows that fundraising for philanthropy is an ongoing and sometimes exhausting task. You have to raise money every year for your operating budget, and then the next year you have to raise it again. The thing that I think is most exciting about our model and the models that we're seeing come up is there's a way to have social impact with a renewable source of capital, with this kind of missing middle flavor of capital. And you don't have to do these plain vanilla equity kinds of investments that are, you're looking for a big return because 9 out of the 10 investments you make in your portfolio aren't going to work, but the 10th one has to be really big. Like, that model does not work when you are working for social impact and poverty alleviation. And I think that we need to match the flavor of capital to the goals of the investors. And investors need to be really comfortable saying, I don't need to maximize my return here. I want to use my capital in a way where I might get the capital back, but I'm really looking for impact. It's not an either or of grants or investments anymore.
Thank you so much, Kate. I love the way that you describe the entire continuum of the spectrum and all the different expectations that people have, and also the concept of the recyclability of philanthropic dollars. That's actually the kind of work that Angels of Impact does, is that we look at taking philanthropic dollars and then helping the communities, but the money comes back so you can do more and more good. So thank you for bringing that point up, Kate. I'm now going to move on to the third part of what I said in the introduction as well. Often people feel that flowing money to marginalized communities alone is enough. They don't really look deeper into how the deal is structured or dealt with, or how they create the deal flow, or how they overcome unconscious biases, how they see risk, how they structure the deal, how they look at even success, to name but a few, right? So I'm going to come back to you again, Jaime. Your organization is started by Indigenous women for Indigenous women. I'd like to see, if you could share some of the important terms that matter, the important approaches that matter, and also share your experience of your own funds with character-based lending and other initiatives that you're currently involved in.
Thank you, appreciate that. Where to start? So as I mentioned before, we're community-led. A lot of our programs and the offerings we give to the community we serve are actually designed by our community. So we ask them, like, what are the challenges? What are the barriers? How do you think we should overcome that? And we've actually built out a lot of our programming around that, and also a little bit of research that we do within our community. So we've actually structured this $10 million fund very much modeled as a result of RSF's work in looking at an integrated capital stack. So we're looking at philanthropic dollars, which we think is critical to at least supporting entrepreneurs, and looking at equity as well, looking at loan, looking at forgivable loans, recoverable grants, etc. Because we feel like those different types of capital can also serve a different purpose, like at each stage of the entrepreneurial journey. And we've actually, in addition to looking at underwriting practices in communities or just in the US, a lot of banks use the 5 C's of credit, which is a very traditional underwriting process in which they look at people's credit scores, how much assets they have, like collateral, what the local market looks like, the conditions, and they look at their character as well as their capacity to repay debt. Because our communities have been economically excluded, it actually puts us in a very terrible position to be able to qualify under those basic underwriting tenets. So what we did is we essentially said, okay, we need to look at the 5 C's of credit, but really in a different way that supports people to not only upskill and support their entrepreneurial dreams, but to actually have an entry point into accessing capital. So we're actually recoining it, the 5 R's of reintegration, and we're looking at underwriting practices from an Indigenous woman's lens, as far as what we would like to see in investment and impact. So I'm going to kind of go all over the place here, but what that looks like for us is not seeking a typical return or impact, metrics. So we're not looking at like a 5% return rate, or, we're not looking to essentially make all the money back. Because some of the things that are important to our communities aren't just money. For example, we know that Indigenous women in this country, 4 in 5 of us will experience violence in our lifetime. If an entrepreneur is supported in her journey, she's able to maintain and access economic safety and safety nets and stability. Therefore, she's able to just have safety in her life, and she's protected. What's the return on investment of a woman's safety for a year, of 2 years, 3 years? Those things are really hard to measure, but we know they're important in our community because we see it right in front of our community. We see that's happening. So we're really trying to push this narrative about what impact looks like, and also even how we define impact. Our measures of wealth, for example, in a lot of our communities are very different. It may be how much assets you have, what's your net worth, how much money do you have in the bank. In our communities, it's, do you have access to your elders? Do you have access to your language? Do you have access to ceremony? Can you go home? So those things are really different, and we're trying to kind of understand how these two, I guess, worldviews or frameworks intersect and match and don't align, and that's okay. But what we're doing in microfinance right now, and soon to be in that, like, hopefully that middle spot, is we're trying to test relationship-based lending. So how much social capital actually supports entrepreneurs. Sorry, my up here. And what we're seeing is actually the people that we work with, the Indigenous women that we work with, are paying off their debts faster than anybody else in our cohort. So long as they're supported with a repayment plan, with technical assistance, and we have a strong relationship with them, so they know they're cared for. And it's actually proving that Indigenous women are investable. They aren't risky investments, and they're actually the ones closest to the solutions. And I think for me, when I think about the network we serve, 2/3 of us are the breadwinners and the bread makers, I joke, in the community. So we're the one that actually could have the greatest impact in our communities, because we're already doing that. We're already the economic drivers. So why not fund our dreams, so that we can continue to have that impact and have a greater ripple effect for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jaime, for taking us back also to the realities on the ground with Indigenous communities in particular, and how impact really needs to be redefined on what it means to the community. And I like the analogy that you use about the bread makers. Here at Angels of Impact, we like to call you the weavers of a fabric of society, because you weave the fabric that holds resiliency, and it's really what the world needs today, I believe. So thank you. I know it's a very brief introduction, but I hope this audience will get a sense of the depth of the issue. And I love how you reminded us about looking at impact metrics in a very different way and looking at success in a different way too. So thank you, Jaime. Jasper, we'll come to you next. As you mentioned, RSF has been at the cutting edge of, paving the way for integrated capital. You use many tools. As you said, there are many different funds that you have. I know you have one around women. And more recently, you actually did launch one around racial justice and racial wealth building. So I'd like to turn to you about how non-extractive funding initiatives can really help marginalized communities. Jasper.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question. I want to answer that with a little bit of a loop, but I will get back to actually answering your question. And my loop is that it not only matters what is being funded or who is being funded, but it also matters who makes the decision, who's in the room when decisions are made, and how are those funding decisions made. And so it was really important to us at RSF that we look at our own organization and our own decision-making processes, and also the way that we work with our partners, our investors, our community of investors. And so it was really important to us that we establish a board of our own organization with majority women, and half of our board members identify as a person of color. That was really important. 2/3 of our staff is female, 60% of our executive team. So I'm speaking to you as a white man, right? And I recognize that I need to, and we need to surround ourselves with people who have a different perspective if we want to actually impact change from a gender and racial justice perspective. So that was my little loop. Now, going to your question, so yes, we have a Women's Capital Collaborative and also a Racial Justice Collaborative. Those are thematic pools of philanthropic money out of which we can do really the deepest impact, most catalytic funding. So it can be technical assistance grants, it can be recoverable grants, it can be what they call unsecured. It's not a great term, but the technical term is unsecured loan. I really love relationship lending. That's fantastic. And also, equity investments that we can do out of those funds. The Women's Capital Collaborative really focuses on female founders, owners, and CEOs. And the Racial Justice Collaborative really focuses on Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are leading, owning, or have founded an organization, and also organizations that directly support marginalized communities. And the one thing I want to share about the Racial Justice Collaborative, that's a little bit different from the other collaborative funds that RSF has, because we have a number of those thematic funds. What's different with the Racial Justice Collaborative is that we wanted to organize accountability to what we say we want to do in a different way. So we are working with 4 outside external advisors who help us be held accountable to the change and the impact that we say we want to make with this money. Also recognizing that we are not always the closest to the communities and the networks that we are looking to serve. And we want to learn and get better at that. And that is why we are working with external advisors who are helping us identify opportunities and also help us be held accountable.
Thank you so much, Jasper. I love the complexity of your answer because you have different layers to it, right? So the first layer is we don't just have women as beneficiaries or marginalized communities as beneficiaries, but also as the decision makers. So you actually went into how that structure of decision making was very important. And then you also talk about the accountability, which I thought was very, very, very powerful. The other point that I also liked is that philanthropic dollars actually is what gives you the flexibility to come up with the entrepreneur-friendly and community-relevant structures. So thank you for sharing that with us. And for those of you who want to learn more, obviously you can also go to the RSF website and find out more about the different collaborative tools that Jasper mentioned. Next, we will go to you, Kate, because I think you have a lot that you can add as well.
Capital, right? And the flexibility that philanthropic dollars is coming. So the concept is not just flowing money to marginalized communities, but how it flows, right? How has your organization been working to really structure this in a way that helps to eradicate poverty through your financing structures?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because, when I talk about Upaya, I try to be very careful to not say that we create jobs. It's always the entrepreneur who creates the jobs, and our job is to enable them to be successful. And one of the ways that we think we can do that is by providing them flexible capital, by providing them opportunities to pay us back early. We've been doing convertible notes into India recently with interim repayments. And part of the reason we do that is it's not that we want to control these companies. We want to give capital to the entrepreneurs when they need it. And we will accept, a lower ultimate return in exchange for them paying us back earlier so that we can invest in other companies. We never look to control the companies we work in. And it's not just, as you said, flowing capital into the companies. It's also helping entrepreneurs get the connections to professional services, to peers whom they can learn from. Anything we can do to help an enterprise that may be in a fairly remote area get connected to an ecosystem that can help it be successful. I think that there is flexibility in terms of, if I were beholden to limited partners who are looking to me to ensure quick exits so that they could get their money back, I would probably have to make different decisions from an impact perspective. We have companies in our portfolio who have had a lot of ups and downs in the last 7 or 8 years, but we've been able to stay with them, and they have therefore been able to maintain the jobs that they've created, and they're growing those jobs, and that's our priority. We still hope to get an exit from them, but I don't want to push them to give us an exit because I have limited partners that I am beholden to. And one thing I should say is, you mentioned, you referred to us as a fund. Technically, we're not a fund. We are a nonprofit that accepts grants and pools them as recoverable grants. And that also gives me a lot of flexibility, which I can use, to maximize the impact.
Thank you very much, Kate. I also like the fact that you emphasized about the flexibility that comes out of it. So we're coming towards the end of our panel, so I want to talk a little bit more about a concept that all of you alluded to, which is really the non-financial help and assistance to support enterprises working to alleviate poverty through helping other community-based enterprises as well. So in the non-financial gap area, I'd like to kind of go to Jaime and see what have you been doing in your community to really support the non-financial aspects of supporting your entrepreneurs.
Thank you. We initially started, like I said, as very volunteer-led, a bunch of women around the table thinking, how do we support one another? What makes us very different? And we landed on our core values is that Indigenous women are the backbones of community. We're emerging as entrepreneurs. We're weaving our culture, our community, and connections to manifest change and empower one another. So we use that as our framework whenever we develop programming or tools that support our network. So non-financial, we provide technical assistance on how to grow, how to start a business. We provide a safe, brave, inclusive space so that Indigenous women can convene and be in community with one another. And that actually has helped us to learn a lot about our community through research and data collection so that we can advocate and also design our programs that are relevant and responsive to their needs and what they prioritize. We also are now looking at professional personal development that's woven in, because we're really trying to look at the entrepreneur from a whole woman's perspective, to honor the complexity, the beauty, the wisdom, the ancestral wisdom that exists with each of these women that we serve. And also I think one of the entrepreneurs had said this earlier about the impact in their community around trauma. So we're definitely taking a very much like a trauma-informed lens in anything that we design, including financial tools, because we know that exists, and that we know that can also affect people as they're building their businesses, they're entering spaces where there is no representation of them. So we essentially are trying to look at the work we do from a perspective of power building, from an individual, family, community, systems level approach. So that's what I would say is like the non-financial ways that we support. And I don't know if that was accurate in your question, but
no, absolutely. You talk about ways in bringing power building. I think that's very important. And of course, there's so many different issues. One of the things I love about Native Women Lead, I know at your business summit that I've attended, is you have healers at the center. So you really look at the entrepreneur as a whole, and I found that very, very empowering. I loved every single session that I've been to and meeting all the amazing Native American entrepreneurs too. So thank you, Jaime.
Thank you.
Jasper, I just kind of wanted to, so Jaime talked about power building with our entrepreneurs, and one of the things I've always loved about RSF is also about power sharing. You talked a little bit about that. So when I address this question on non-financial gaps, I'd like you to tell people a little bit more about, you have a methodology of investee and investors sitting at the table coming up with terms. You have this participatory making of how grants are giving up. Please tell us more about what you do for shifting the power balance.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And we're doing something that initially sounds totally out there and kind of a romantic idea, but people like to say that's never going to work. Well, it's worked for 12 years straight and really well. So what we do with our loan fund, and there's about $130 million or so in the loan fund at this point, is that every quarter we meet with a self-selected group of investors in the fund, as well as borrowers who have taken loans out of that fund. And we sit around, we like that to be a round table, or today it's a Zoom table. And we talk about the realities that people experience in their own lives as it relates to either their investment or their loan out of the fund. And it's really remarkable. And every quarter I attend every single one of them. And I just love being in those meetings, because every quarter we notice that there are always investors coming to the table hoping that they will leave that meeting with a higher return for themselves, right? That's the paradigm that we all know. And borrowers who come to that meeting in the hope that at the end of the meeting, they're going to be paying less. Because of how we facilitate those meetings, what happens is that the focus shifts from me to we. So we make the interdependency visible of the community of investors and borrowers and RSF as an intermediary. And we talk about what's going to happen if we increase the rate by 25 basis points, or what happens if we decrease it. And let's look at what is right for this system, for this community, not only for me or for you, but for the system, to really build a healthy community that's sustainable, that is fair, that is not extractive, but regenerative. And again, I told you, this is going to sound romantic. So we've been doing this for 12 years, every single quarter, and it helped us through 2 major recessions. It has helped our borrowers in a big way, because we are not tied to LIBOR or Wall Street telling us what the rate is going to be. It's our community setting the rate. Of course, we're not immune to market forces. They play a role, and we talk about that, but it's the community setting the rate. I'll be really quick in the second part of my answer. I don't want to take too much time. On the philanthropic side, we work with individuals and organizations to help cut that proverbial cord between money and power, right? Those things are always connected in our world. And when we talk about philanthropy, it can become a transactional thing. And whereas philanthropy, we believe, should be a true gift. It should be a gift, and a gift does not expect something in return. I'm not giving my daughter a birthday present and saying, honey, I want this and that back, right? That's not the nature of a gift. So we work with our donors and also with grantees on processes around participatory granting, around democratizing philanthropy, that help the communities that are to be supported to determine amongst themselves who should get how much money from the donor.
Perhaps some of the non-financial gaps that you fill, anything you alluded to it here, perhaps you could talk a little bit more about how some of these non-financial services that you offer are also very key to filling this gap.
Yeah, so when we make an investment, we are almost always the first institutional investor. And so we're working with very early stage companies, and they have different gaps. Very often they haven't put in place a financial system or an MIS system, and we can help them oversee that, and help them understand their business at a quantitative level that maybe they haven't understood before. The other thing that we do, which I think is a bit unusual even among impact investors, is we really prioritize working with them on their impact management, helping them communicate their vision for impact through a theory of change. All of the entrepreneurs we work with want to have impact, have thought about how they're going to have impact, but they may not have put in place the systems to track that. And that's something, to be honest, our team is really good at. And so we help build the systems, or help tweak systems that they already have, so that they know whether they're having the impact they expect, and if they're not, what kinds of changes they might want to make to their program model, their business model, to be able to have that kind of impact. It also, down the road, will help them raise more capital from impact investors if they have an evidence-driven impact model and not just a theory.
Thank you so much. All this conversation has actually been gathering a lot of feedback in the chat. We actually had 2 questions, but we don't have time to go through both of them. But we're going to go over a little bit. So I just do want to address this question, and either Jaime or any of you could just jump in on this if you like. Specifically, the question is, a lot of investors, they tend to have a cognitive dissonance, right? If they're giving money to philanthropy, yes, they deal with a different world, but when they're giving money to investments, they think differently, and there's sort of a cognitive dissonance there. Do any of you have suggestions on how more investors could be, impact investors especially, to be convinced to rethink the way they invest into marginalized communities? So, would Jaime? Yeah.
I know that we're all connected as human beings, and I always would impress upon investors, philanthropy, decision makers, wealth holders, to really think of it from that perspective as just a human being. Just also think about it from the person walking in their shoes, essentially, really thinking about what their entrepreneurial journey looks like, what potential challenges they may have, and also what things beyond their control are actually challenging them. So I think that always helps to help people see from another perspective, and really think, well, does it make sense then if I'm expecting a 5% return? Does this make sense if I'm expecting them to grow 100 jobs, in the next couple of years? So I think just connecting on that very human, heart-centered level is really, I think, is what moves people.
Thank you, Jaime. Jasper, I'm sorry, Kate, we don't have time to jump into you, but Jasper, would you like to just jump in?
Sure, and what a great question. I think it all starts with starting to see money as a tool and not as a goal. And once we start realizing and understanding that money doesn't rule us, we shouldn't be the ones that are, told what to do basically by money or by capital, but we can decide what to do with it. And, asking ourselves, what's our money doing, when we're asleep, and how do I feel about that? And it does go to that human heart connection. I completely agree. And I really think the crux is in seeing money as a tool for change, or as a tool to continue the status quo, or as a tool to continue to be extractive. I mean, what do we really want to do with money?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really time for us to ask ourselves, how can we use money differently in this world? So on that note, we're coming to the end, but I would always like to end with each of you giving some words of wisdom. And I would like to start always with you, Jaime. And I want to tie it a little bit also to the climate change agenda, because we just came out of COP26 and the whole world is thinking about that, right? Just some words that you would like to share with us to end this.
Thank you. To all the entrepreneurs, I just honor your wisdom and your ancestral wisdom and the insight that you bring from your culture and your worldview and your lens. And I think that's important to uplift, to honor your story and the story of your people and your community. So yeah, just keep holding that close and then in light of climate change, I think Indigenous people can truly inform how business can be done better. That is not extractive, but people or our planet. It actually can be prosperity for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaime, so much. And Jasper, given all the work that RSF has done, I really would love to hear your perspective as well and some words of wisdom.
Yeah, I would like to echo a lot of what Miss Georgia Tan said in her address. Climate change isn't something that's isolated. It's human-made, first of all. So it's climate change is really human behavior that changed that's making the planet change. And the impact, we're all impacted by climate change, but not equally. And that, in its turn exacerbates social injustice, poverty. And again, it impacts women much stronger in this world, very clearly so. I mean, the numbers are very clear about it. And at the same time, a lot of the solutions, I believe, are there. Technologically, a lot is possible. And there are a lot of innovations and ideas, many of which we saw. I mean, the weavers saying, we should determine the price. I mean, that's where it starts. It's wonderful. It's great, that mentality. So the ideas are there. The innovators are there. The entrepreneurs are there. I really think that, and that's the humble task that I see for us as funders and investors and lenders, is getting dollars in the hands of the people who have the solution. And I am, with my organization, really committed to putting more money into the hands of women, of female founders, and of female owners of organizations that have solutions that help us heal our planet and help us heal communities, because those two things go hand in hand.
As you know, here in this program, we're working with women-led community-based enterprises, all uplifting their communities out of poverty. Just curious, with all the work that you've done in India, if you have any words of wisdom or advice to share with them.
So I don't know if they're words of wisdom or advice. I'll just start by saying thank you for the work you do. I mean, I'm always inspired by entrepreneurs, and not just sort of echoing a tagline when I say they're the heroes. It's really hard to be an entrepreneur, and yet the entrepreneurs are the ones who see the opportunities, who push past, things that most reasonable people would walk away from and say it's not worth it. And they are the economic engines in these communities in so many ways. I mean, we've certainly seen it in our own portfolio in the last 2 years with COVID. So many horrible stories were coming out of India about micro entrepreneurs who suddenly had absolutely no income. They had no way to run their small businesses. They had no money coming in. But when we went to the people employed by the companies we've invested in, the majority of them, 2/3 of them, were still earning money. Even though their companies may not have been earning any revenue, they're continuing to pay their job holders. And the reason that they were doing that is that's the reason the entrepreneurs were in this business. They're trying to drive economic empowerment into their communities. And so they held their communities together. And so I think that, everybody who is attending this conference should feel very, very proud of the work that they're doing, and know that if sometimes it seems that the obstacles are too steep, that's what entrepreneurs are made to do, is to scale those obstacles.
Thank you so much, all of you. I really, really appreciate Jaime, Jasper, and Kate for being here with us today. You know, I know it's late for you, and with the new daylight savings times as well, it got a little confusing trying to coordinate all of this, but I'm so glad it came together. I hope everyone in the audience will rethink how we can look at philanthropic dollars to go into restorative investing. There is a funding gap that needs to be filled. And we have models. We have people who are paving the way. We have models that we can emulate. And it's really time for us to show up differently and make an impact in the community-based enterprises and indigenous communities that will really lift us up to creating a better world for all of us. On that note, thank you once again. And we're going to move into, for those of you who missed the first day, we actually have a recap video so you can get a glimpse of what happened yesterday. Thank you.